we're going to notice how advertising is actually going to have like a good effect in adopting like these voice clones. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the state, the artists, and the rights, and how comfortable they are.
Hey everyone, I'm Brett Kinsella, founder of Voicebot.ai, and I'm here once again to do the year in review. We've been doing these all the way since 2016 in Voicebot, but on the podcast since 2017. And it's one of my favorite episodes of the year. We've got it in video for you this year once again, and I have some amazing guests who are going to help us break down the top stories from 2022. And the first one will be Peachy-Jean Retizos from Warner Music Group. Peachy-Jean, thanks for joining me.
Hello. Well, glad to be here.
All right. And we have Tom Hewitson. He needs no introduction from LabWorks.io.
Hi, Brett.
And my colleague, Eric Schwartz from Voicebot.ai. Hey, Eric. All right. So there's been a lot of news this year. We're going to get right into it. In fact, a lot of people are going to probably think that we're going to start off with the Amazon story. And we're going to get to that because that's been a big story recently. But I actually think the top story of the year has been our friends over at Google and the end of life of Google Assistant for third-party actions. These are called conversational actions. And I will tell you that there is actually a secret thing going on over there that a lot of people who are in the industry maybe get, but maybe some people don't. We've got all of these Google Assistant devices, which are only going to be used for Google first-party solutions right now. But, you know, what do they really care about? They really care about that smartphone right in the middle. So they're trying to get everybody to use Google Assistant on smartphones. They're going to do some support of the other devices. But let's break this down. Peachy-Jean, you are in the consumer space with Warner Music Group. You're using these platforms to reach consumers. You keep track of what's going on. What did you make of this story?
I was like, oh, they finally came out and told us, right? And so it's interesting because 5 years ago, the focus was all conversational actions for Google. And I think it's come to the point where it's the transition time. They dug through all the data and seeing that it's just simply not how consumers at home, especially, are using their devices. I think you nailed it on the head where they're concentrating and focusing on the phones because the penetration of the Google Assistant itself is more so on the mobile device and on the go. Like that's always been the battle, right, between them and Amazon. Amazon's got the share within the home, but they've got the share outside. So I think it's a showing of kind of exactly of how consumers are going to be using it, user behavior. You know, as someone in my last role, we were building a lot for content for them. But now, like in the music space, it's again going to show that first party access to certain types of content is first party and going to be a better experience for like the main utilities for the devices at home.
So do you think it's like a bad idea that they did this, that they backed off?
I don't. I think they were following what has been kind of being proven over the last few years of at the end of the day, when you come home, there's only so many things that you're going to want to use it for. And which is why I think it's even within that same amount of time, it's showing what you do use it for when you're on the go. Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Like when you come home, how many times do you want to ask for things from other places of content outside of just doing those? Set a timer, remind me this, give me
Right.
that, give me like very quick pieces of news. And especially with social media, there's so many pieces of content and everyone wants to be on these platforms. But at the end of the day, what are people actually using it for? So I get it. And I think they're saying Google Assistant and voice itself is being used in other ways. And it's just not in that big plethora content side at home.
All right, Tom, you must have an opinion on this.
Yeah.
Well, I think the thing that hurt me the most actually was when Google came out and said that nobody was using this because I had like 100,000 people a month use it using one of my games on Google. And, okay, maybe that's not a lot of people by Google standards, but it's still enough people that they write to you to complain when it gets shut off. I don't think it was true that nobody wanted this. Google did absolutely nothing to promote third-party actions. You know, I own both sets of devices. I have them set up next to each other in every room in the house. And Alexa, for all its issues, does continuously have a rolling screen of like, here's a skill you might want to try. Here's something you could do. Google has never done anything like that. And then they're like, nobody uses conversational actions. Well, did you even try to tell people that they existed? Not as far as I know, no. So yeah, I'm pretty upset that Google kind of said they nobody wanted these things when they didn't really try.
I think that's a totally fair comment. And I actually think Amazon has tried a bit, although they probably haven't done something as aggressive as they should have. Like there's a skill for that or something like that, like hearkening back to the old App Store ads that Apple ran to get people interested in these third-party creations. But Amazon did do a lot of things. They have a lot of PR outreach. They bring people into the studio. They do videos about them to show them how great this is. And as you say, they've got the newsletter that goes out, which promotes third-party skills every week. And this has been going on since 2015, I think. And yes, my Echo Show is a rotating billboard. It's out of home advertising, but it's in-home advertising, like right there. And yeah, they're promoting third-party skills regularly. Oh, they're more and more. They're promoting, making promotions suggesting I repurchase items that I purchased before on Amazon, which I think makes sense as well. I don't know, Eric, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it shows what you were saying, that there was definitely a lack of emphasis on trying to draw people into trying voice apps and into making people aware of what they were capable of. But also, you know, as you point to the phone and as Google has said in interviews and so on, that they're very keen on the idea of an integrated ecosystem where Android essentially is the backbone for everything. And they apparently just lost faith in the idea that these sort of third-party conversational actions could be a productive part of that ecosystem, and they'd rather focus on getting more people to build Android apps if they're going to have third-party services at all.
Well, the company's very data-driven, right? So they just looked at the numbers and said, "Hey, you know, there's not enough people using it," which is weird because there's 500 million people using Google Assistant. It's just mostly on the phone at this point, not as much on and not as much in third-party actions. It's almost all first-party. But as you say, Tom, the data is going to reaffirm what your actions have been to drive behavior.
Exactly. You can't use data when you're trying to build something new, because the data is going to tell you that it doesn't exist until you make it exist. You know, yeah, I think that they lacked courage, actually. They lacked the courage to actually see this through. And, you know, we're going to talk about Alexa's problems down the line or later in this episode. But, you know, they do have the courage to actually try and make this work. And I think that is a big difference between them and Google. I mean, to be honest, though, it's always been a bit unclear whether Google would have done this if Amazon hadn't already launched Alexa and it had been successful. I think Google were very much like, oh, like, you know, Alexa's there and it's a thing. We better like have something similar too. But they never really had the kind of courage of their convictions in the same way that Amazon have.
I agree, actually. If you look at their approach, they were going to bring out a device. It was the launch of Alexa Skills Kit, really, that I believe forced them into, you know, purchasing API.ai, having this third-party ecosystem, fighting for parity. And even if they're like, okay, well, you know, we gave it a shot. It was optionality. We had option value to see if this could work out. It's not been an overarching success. As Peachy-Jean has said, like, people are using mostly first party. There's some third party that's had some success, but mostly first party. And they're like, oh, okay, well, we gave it a shot. We're going to move on to something else. So, like, I don't really fault them for doing it. But your point about not having the courage, I think it's a mistake. The anchor in the home of smart speakers and smart displays, we're going to talk about devices that are going away. You know, they've been announced that didn't go anywhere, but those devices aren't going away. And those, in concert with the television and other of these anchor appliances in the home, are going to be really important. And I believe that ultimately they're going to lose market share in that space. And They're keeping some of those features like smart home alone and some of the first party, which sort of makes sense. It's like the 80-20. Let's just do the Pareto on this. But I think it's a real mistake because it's going to make their devices look less appealing.
It's also telling that Google always started from the phone. I mean, so many of their projects began at or they were the first to create a phone that could essentially turn into a smart display because they were thinking your phone is the center of your life, not your smart speaker, smart display at home. It's all about your phone, but not understanding that some people prefer to have the thing that sits in their home all day without having to take out their phone.
Yeah, I think there's like also two things at play, as Tom has mentioned, is they weren't great at promoting it. And I think that's what it is they lost the marketing part of the assistant. Everyone knows that when you say Alexa this, that's the trend on TikTok. Those are the commercials you mostly see. Like when you walk around and you say it, everyone knows what you're talking about. No one like calls someone, hey Google, do what I need, and makes that joke. They go on the marketing side. And then second is we all talk about Google having the biggest penetration on mobile devices. I think it's also they're looking at the global play of it. Is Google wins that mobile device penetration across all the oceans, and Alexa's penetration outside is just a lot less, right? And you're thinking about once you leave the US, how many people are having the smart homes outside major countries like the UK. So I understand like when Google is following that data in terms of a global strategy.
I think Google are they're thinking less clearly about the home. You know, their kind of extent of thinking about the home is that sometimes you're there and you've got your phone with you. But, you know, and you kind of see this, like it drives me crazy that Google Assistant doesn't play nicely with my Sonos system. It's like every single time you ask to play the radio, it's like, oh, I can't do that. And it's like, well, why do I have you in my house at all if you can't play the radio? Like, what is the point of a smart speaker that can't play the radio? And you know, again, like I have a Nest thermostat that is owned by Google. It doesn't work nicely with my Google Assistant smart speaker. I'm like, how on earth can you kind of have this thing that's supposed to be a hub of a home that doesn't work with like the other bits of the smart home that you own? And you know, to kind of Amazon's credit, they are kind of thinking about the home and quite focused on the home, and you know, the works with Alexa program and stuff. They're really trying to make all of this kind of smart home stuff fit together, and I just don't think that Google has a vision for that at all.
Okay, let's move into Amazon's move into the smart home. So we've got this. Our second big story today is around Amazon Alexa. And it's not necessarily about all those lovely devices on the screen that we have here right now. It is about layoffs. In fact, 10,000 layoffs is sort of the rumor. It's not really clear. There's conversations about the fact that Amazon devices, of which Alexa is part, had lost $10 billion, and that maybe the Alexa product line was the biggest driver of that. Why don't we give Eric the first crack at this one? Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously some of the details of layoffs are still somewhat nebulous, but the fact that devices and Alexa have been a huge loss, the source of a lot of lost revenue for Amazon is definitely undeniable. And I think it's hard to say how much of it is internal versus external. I think one element we were talking about earlier in terms of Amazon taking the marketing side of things, or winning the marketing side, is Jeff Bezos was a huge advocate for Alexa and did quite a lot to push resources into it to keep it going and to keep developing, despite what more cautious managers might be concerned about. So I think it's notable that in the time since he's left, there's now this focus on is it worth continuing to invest in this technology when it's not bringing a revenue return. And I think it's telling that there have been several devices that Amazon either built as sort of prototypes or designed as a smart home element. We talk about the Amazon microwave. There is not necessarily voice per se, but the Amazon Glow for children, the Alexa Cloud Cam.
We're going to talk about those in a minute.
Yeah, there's a lot, but I think the layoffs suggest that there won't be a lot of new devices or big features coming besides the ones that they have talked about recently, I guess, that may or may not come out anytime soon.
Okay, so Peachy-Jean, you are building for these platforms. Alexa, you've done work in multiple companies now at this point, building for them. What do you think this portends for the future of Amazon and Alexa? And what do you think about what it means in terms of the way like big companies are going to think about this as a channel?
Yeah. Well, first, can I say that after all this news came out, I had so many people text me, be like, "Are you going to be okay?" I go, "I'll be fine." I don't know if any of you got the same type of communication. I think it's at this point just a turn of Amazon figuring out what their focus will be of how they're going to go about using what devices are going to be worth the investment and the best way they're going to utilize Alexa. I think when you are building from scratch, like they were something from completely new, and like Jeff Bezos, he went hard. He was like, we're going to build and think about all the ways we can use this in every different hardware and then see which ones works. And then they took that risk. And then naturally, Amazon's bread and butter is commerce. I think this is a showing of the commerce via voice path just didn't happen in the way they wanted to where that would have essentially made up for all like the investment and the, you know, whatever they put into it, the cost behind hardware and the promoting and devising it and everything that happens in the back end. I think that's a show of this, is that the commerce side isn't panning out. Like that's just not where they're reaping the benefit.
Tom Hewitson, you might have an opinion on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think my opinion is that it's a little bit too early to say what the kind of the actual impacts are going to be. You know, it is a complaint that, you know, myself and many other developers have had of Amazon and the Alexa team, is that there's almost like too much stuff. There's not enough focus on kind of iterating and fixing the kind of the bread and butter issues. And there's a kind of constant deluge of new features. And that's actually very difficult for kind of developers to kind of stay on top of, when really what you want is the kind of the basics that you're still having trouble with being fixed. I think, yeah, it's hard. It really depends on where those cuts are made. I don't have a good sense of kind of how those cuts were made. But if Amazon are going to kind of continue to support Alexa, but in a kind of more focused way, where perhaps they're going to focus more on the bread and butter issues, it could potentially actually be better for Alexa developers than the current situation. However, if they kind of choose to salami slice and kind of keep up the shipping of features, but you have kind of more things where, you know, the docs aren't quite right, or, you know, it doesn't work in quite the way you expect, that's going to get a lot more painful. And honestly, it's going to be like 6 months at least before we really know whether that's the case or not.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It could be better. There's an old adage in software is, if you want to sell more, offer less, you know, offer fewer things, because people get confused. But it was part of their portfolio strategy that they had as a company, to that the features, why Alexa was going to be so desirable, is it just had so many features and it had so many applications. And I think one of the things that we've recognized is that it's not really, there aren't that many killer apps associated with it. I think there's some people who say there are no killer apps for smart speakers, we'll say, and that's really been Amazon's play here. That's not true. There are plenty of killer apps. I mean, half the people who own one use it every day, and half of those people use it many times a day. So I know that there are these killer apps, but I think part of it is this portfolio strategy, and I don't really fault them for the approach. It was this whole 1,000 points of light strategy. It's like, if I just put a lot of stuff out there, what will work. And I've talked to Dave Limp about that, who's the SVP of Amazon Devices. A couple of years ago, we were sitting in the Spheres after one of their launch events, and we are talking about like, what, tell me in your own words, like, what is the strategy? And it's just like, we don't know what's going to work or what's going to be the next big thing. But if we don't try, we know it won't be that thing. So it's worth it for us to invest right now and to have the information to understand what is working. And, some of those things actually significantly added to the value of the Alexa ecosystem.
I think it's notable that I often think of, or when we think of new technology, it's usually government or very large infrastructure type companies developing it, and then it trickles down to the consumer side. And simply because Amazon had so much money, they could replicate that process from the other direction, and which again was risky, and in their case involved pursuing a lot of things all at once, which means a lot of misses as well as a few hits. But it honestly couldn't have been possible unless Amazon and Google were big enough to stomach those kinds of losses for so long. Whether or not it was a good idea from an investor standpoint is a different question, but the things that we do use these technologies for probably wouldn't exist if they weren't willing to deal with seeing all those giant negative numbers.
Yeah, giant. Well, and I think there's another nuance here. So Andy Jassy has been CEO for a year and a half now. Last year they were largely absorbing the changes that came from the pandemic. We go back to 2020, and it's not like the Alexa stuff stopped, but it wasn't the prime directive anymore of the company. They had to just ship product because it was like an overwhelming surge in demand. It really reverted to a focus on the e-commerce business as opposed to some of these other growth areas, because the e-commerce business was growing faster than anything else. I mean, it was insane. And then the other thing that happened is Jassy takes over as CEO mid-year. He's basically implementing Bezos's plan, but also planning is already for the following year, which was this year, was already underway at that point. So, replacing a founder is tough. Are you going to make big changes right then? There's a lot of uncertainty. Just go with it. But then we have the looming economic crisis, recession, inflation, pressure on the core e-commerce business. Okay, he's got a free hand all of a sudden to reshape the business. And if he doesn't, he's got a potential problem. A year ago, if he just changed everything wholesale that Bezos had done, like even who knows if he had the latitude to do that with Bezos still as chairman, but if he did, like people would have questioned him all over the place. He's at the position now, if he doesn't make changes, people are going to question whether he's actually the right person. All right. Any other comments on this?
No, I would agree that I think next year, that's when whatever his philosophy or plans are will definitely come into focus.
I'm counting on there being fewer devices, and we're going to talk about that in just a second, but more focus. I think Tom is right that there's still this gap, though, of new applications to drive new users. What do you think, Peachy-Jean?
I think Tom had it when there's it's overload, and I think part of it is Amazon should take a step back. Maybe they kind of already have. It's more of their value is being consumer obsessed, and I think when you overload your consumers with products but forget to educate them about it and what they actually do, and like take that time in their marketing to show how you do things, that's where they kind of lost a lot of the ability for adoption for all those different things, because I know how to use her Alexa in like really basic ways, but like everything that's Alexa enabled and all these other new things is like, you can only read so many user manuals, and why would you want to read them over and over about the same assistant? Right? So like they got to rein that back.
I think like one thing I would like to, I hope that they might kind of consider is focusing a bit more on the kind of relationship between Alexa and Fire TV. I thought it was kind of interesting that a lot of the device announcements were really kind of like Fire TV announcements this year compared to previous years where there were lots of weird and wonderful Alexa devices. And Alexa on Fire TV feels like a very kind of like poor cousin compared to, you know, on a specific Alexa device. And it seems like a big miss from Amazon's perspective, really, because there's an awful lot of Fire TV devices already out there in kind of regular use. And the TV is unambiguously an experience that could be improved with voice. I think that there's little doubt amongst kind of those of us that work in the industry that kind of voice controlled TV is going to be a big thing in the future. And kind of maybe like finding a way to make Alexa more of a kind of a first party, well, kind of like bringing it more to the fore in Fire TV, and maybe even helping bring skills to the fore on Fire TV will actually really help the ecosystem grow without too much kind of additional work.
Yeah, 100%. Fire TV, based on some information that I have, is a really good revenue driver, both from a licensing standpoint, because we've got third parties using Fire TV, but also from a product standpoint. And the TV is actually really important. I would say that voice-enabled TVs are already here, you know, through either the control boxes or the TVs themselves. It's just nothing's integrated seamlessly. We don't have that really tight experience yet. I think Fire TV is actually the platform that's in a position to do that better than Apple and Google. And again, what do we see? We see Amazon. They don't have the mobile device. They're not really in the car as much. You know, they're not in these other spaces, but they have this anchor in the home. And Fire TV is going to be one of the most successful platforms I think they have. I think that is their next killer platform. And maybe it already is, just based on sales that we've seen so far. All right, let's move on to some devices that aren't at the level of Fire TV, maybe not quite so successful. Eric has done a lot of stories this year. We have the No More series we started a few years ago. I think it was Echo Look was the first one. Echo Look No More. The one thing I will say is that Amazon with devices is as ruthless, I believe, as Google is with its applications. In fact, maybe more ruthless, because it tends to pull the plug sooner, puts things out, gives them maybe a shot. I don't know if it gave them as much of a shot as they should have, but then pulled them. So let's start with you, Eric. This is I mean, that you know a lot about.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon is simultaneously very ruthless about pulling out devices that they're not interested in supporting anymore, but also has an entire program built around a sort of commercial democracy of if enough people say they're willing to buy something, then they'll make it. Which is its own interesting approach, which means that a small amount of a device may get made and then never again, as we saw with the Ring device a few years ago.
That's kind of like what happened with Echo too, right? Echo was limited release to only a subset of Prime users, and then they saw how it went, and then they made a little bit more and a little bit more, and then it was like, oh, this is really working. They poured on the market.
And in this case, quite a few of the devices that have been pulled away, the way I say it, there's devices that have been basically their purpose has been subsumed into the Echo Show or the Echo itself. I mean, as we're talking about, you know, the Look and some of the other devices, and I think that's the case with things like the Cloud Cam. I mean, they don't really need an Alexa Cloud Cam when they already own a couple of smart home companies that build better ones anyway. And then there's the devices that I feel like they're almost like throwing chum in the water. You know, you lure interested developers with the Amazon with the Alexa microwave in the hope that microwave companies will see potential and start integrating the technology into with their manufacturing, and then you don't need it anymore. And then sometimes you just get experiments like the Glow, which feels very much a product of the pandemic, since it's essentially a communications and game playing tool for kids to play with people who are not nearby. And it did have some, interesting technology. The projection screen, interactive screen is definitely something I think we'll probably see more of. But Yeah, and then in that vein, I mean, that's experimenting with that kind of thing. That's very much what Spotify did with the Spotify car thing, which is which is a great tool if you have a car that's old enough that it doesn't have a screen built in, essentially.
Yeah.
And then you get things like Meta Portal, which was designed really as an enterprise tool for office conference rooms, and it came out just as everyone stopped going to conference rooms and offices. So
exactly, yeah. So Amazon just has the distinction of canceling the most products related to Alexa in this space, but it's also because they had the most products. Let's see. Let's go to Tom. What are your thoughts on all of the cancellations?
Formerly being of Meta, I'm pretty sure that device was designed because you could never find a meeting room, and so you could now carry around your little VC thing for your team that is in the office and just like plonk it down on a kind of a hot desk somewhere and do your kind of like hybrid remote in-person meeting. Yeah, I really like actually. There were a couple of devices there that I really liked. So I thought the Glow was very, very interesting. And I could have imagined if they had managed to get it adopted more, building for that. I was quite kind of interested in it.
Right.
I just thought, there's not going to be enough of these sold to make it any kind of return for a developer.
Well, it came out too late. Don't you think that came out too late? If that had come out, like they wouldn't have anticipated this. If that had been on the market already and people had been building for it in 2019, like the pandemic would have made that very popular. I'm not sure it would have been sticky beyond the pandemic era, but it's almost like if you were in perpetual lockdown, that's going to be great. I'm not sure once you get back to normal life, that is.
I mean, I could imagine it for playing some kinds of games, even where you're kind of co-located. It could make sense. Kind of fulfilling a kind of a digital board game type role. I don't think that product was quite the right thing for it, but I think that there could be a kind of a version of that that's quite cool. I was actually very sad about the demise of Car Thing from Spotify. I thought it was nicely designed. I thought that Spotify were one of the kind of more interesting alternatives to the kind of Amazon, Google duopoly. I know there is Siri and like a couple of others, but I kind of thought wouldn't it be great if we had a kind of a successful consumer assistant developed in Europe, and Spotify are. I think they might be Europe's largest consumer tech company. If they're not the largest, they're certainly one of the largest. And, they already had the kind of primary use case for a smart speaker locked down the music point of view. I really couldn't think of anyone better to have a go at it than that. What I can't work out with Car Thing is why they stopped. So the people I know that have them really like them. And actually, I know a couple of people that have their Car Thing at home on their desk because they like to use it as a way to control their music whilst working on their computer without changing a window. I mean, that probably tells you something about developers and kind of how much money we're willing to spend on gadgets for random use cases that can easily be done a different way. But all I can assume is that the cost of producing it became unbearable because of the chip shortage. I think that might have been more of a victim of the chip shortage than necessarily a failure of demand. And I kind of hope maybe it will come back one day, although I suspect it's very unlikely.
I think it's a failure of demand because we're not seeing the Amazon Echo Auto take off and stuff like that. But Peachy-Jean might have a comment about music in the car.
Yeah, well, I think it's when it comes to the car, like Eric had said, the Car Thing was good if you have a car that doesn't have a car screen. So now you're competing about like all these cars that already have screens that won't need it. But then it's also the other utility that you need a screen for is directions. So you have this one hardware device that only controls music, but at the end of the day, that's a little more like of a passive experience music, because again, well, one, you're paying attention to the road, but directions come first. So I think they're competing against what you need that screen for. So I think that's one. And then all the other ones is, and Tom really hit this on the nose, is developers you're building all this hardware that have features that people want to use, but they don't want it as like extra gadgets. I think they're features that could have been made innately in devices that are already out. I do think, I'm curious with them trying the microwave thing. I'm fascinated what Samsung has in the pipeline, because their bread and butter appliances in the home. I think they're going to kind of take learnings from that and end up kind of capitalizing on what they're going to offer now with their smart home setup. So I'm fascinated and looking forward to seeing what's going to come of that, because maybe Bixby's going to make a big comeback.
Baby.
I will say also, just quickly on the Spotify thing, though, is that having used it a bunch, I really like the Spotify voice assistant, just in terms of speed and efficiency and accuracy of response. It felt very smooth in a way that sometimes Alexa and Google Assistant don't. I don't know if it's purely
the domain is narrower. They're only looking for music.
Yeah, and maybe that's why. But it was I did feel good to use it.
Although I'm not really sure it's better. But
maybe not better. It felt like a more comfortable interaction. It didn't feel like I had to pause much, for instance.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so let's continue with this. Like the question on, I'm going to do two things here. We're going to talk now about like one, I think, generally negative trend line and one positive trend line here. So I've got a couple charts because that's what we do a lot here. So smart speaker adoption among U.S. adults. UK is a little different, but not that much different. What we've seen is rapid deceleration in adoption of smart speakers. And that's a good proxy, because that is the new device. There's more people who don't have one than have one. So, you still have a large potential market. And this is right here, the percentage of US adults that have a smart speaker. And you can see that obviously you're going to have very high growth rates when the numbers are small, and it's harder to get big growth rates. But, essentially between 2020 and 2022, there's been very little growth. And so what that means is smart speaker adoption sort of come up against the wall. The people who want one of these already have one. And so, and you see it in the marketing that the sellers of smart speakers are really focused on upgrades, getting people to buy the new devices as opposed to getting new people in. And I think a lot of that is because there haven't been any really new breakout applications, like new ideas out there. There's no Pokemon Go that just came along, said, oh, another 10% of the adult population has just adopted this because they wanted that one feature, and then they get the benefit of all the other features. So I'll throw that up there. The flip side of this is smart home in general is continuing to sort of this ruthless march towards invasion into the home. So again, there's some deceleration there as well. It's like we've gotten through all the technophiles who want these things, but over half the people in the country, in the US, and we've got some different data for UK, but UK is actually even a little bit more advanced in terms of adoption. Tends to be a little bit more tech friendly, even though it gets all the products later and fewer features. But yeah, we've got more than half the people that have it. There's a lot of companies. There's a lot of different use cases. The TV is one of the biggest. And I should note that this does not include smart speakers. So if you actually, just the US data, if you include smart speakers, it's almost 59% of the people who have one. Some people consider smart speakers as part of the smart home, but they're so different from an appliance standpoint. We always break the data out. So very traditional smart home products are super popular. So, given that, why don't Tom Hewitson, what are your thoughts?
I mean, my first thought is that I'm amazed that there are 15% of people own smart home devices but don't have a smart speaker. I kind of like, why not? Like, why would you have why would you have
so they've got a video doorbell. Video doorbell.
Right.
They control.
Okay, all right. So video doorbell. that kind of set, like sends your phone, and that. I guess that kind of makes sense if your primary use for kind of smart home is like being able to kind of say, okay, so I'm not, I don't have a
smart
video
thermostat,
doorbell,
like,
actually,
okay, so
so
another one, smart thermostat. So you even said that the smart speakers don't control them.
yeah.
Very
Well,
well.
I mean, this was going to be my point, is that the smart speakers, I have smart home, I have like smart lights, kind of smart thermostat and whatever. It doesn't work reliably with my smart speakers, and I really can't understand why. Because we talk about kind of listening to music being the number one use case. Well, that's true, unless you have smart home, in which case, without doubt, the number one reason that you speak to your smart speaker is to like turn the lights on and off, and to do all that kind of stuff. And it kind of seems to me that, if there are people out there that have kind of smart home stuff that don't have smart speakers, that then kind of like Amazon and Google are really missing a trick in trying to kind of upsell those people, because they've already expressed a kind of an interest in wanting that kind of thing.
Well, that was actually the most of the growth last year, was people who had smart home, who didn't have smart speakers, came in. And so, 2020 is just an odd year. So let's just put that aside. Last year, when they're starting to get back to normalcy, they did actually get into more. And that coupling, you see it. And you see it in the promotions. And Amazon's been doing this for about 3 years now, that primarily they're not selling I should say their best promotions are a smart speaker plus a smart home device. What do you think, Peachy-Jean?
I think one of the things that could be affecting it, just like kind of plateauing, like you said, it's once someone has it, like it's in there. I think it's a generational thing. Is these Gen Z and whoever the next generation technically is, like the 2-year-olds now, are going to be the first generation that don't know a life without it, right? So I think the next growth will be like, as these like high school kids are going into college or moving into other apartments, like we'll find more maybe in solid. I think that's part of it. It's just they've hit the demographic that would do it. Whoever's not going to do it, not going to adopt it. And then after that, we'll see another surge as people start moving into their own places. I think ultimately what's going to happen.
We've done research on this. Like regular users of voice assistants, it sort of tops out around 50% of the population.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you might be coming up at about 75 to 80% of regular users of voice assistants that have smart speakers kind of makes sense to me. Like not everybody's going to want that device in their home for whatever reason.
Yeah. And I think, again, we haven't touched on it too much, but privacy is still a big issue, right? Like some just don't want it. They value their privacy. They know data is being shared here and there. I think engineers and developers definitely need to get better in making sure the devices don't get triggered in silence, because that's what freaks people out.
Well,
right?
I'm actually hearing, like, it's interesting. I've heard both things. I probably need to do a little research even among our community on this. I've been hearing that people are having harder time activating the devices lately, that maybe they've clamped down a little bit, made it less permissive, because they're trying to have fewer false positives on wakes.
Yeah. And those are like two issues they don't want, right? That's like the worst of both sides.
Exactly.
It doesn't work when I want it to, and then it works when I don't want it to, right?
Exactly. Eric.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, that they've sourced all that. I think part of it is that the new versions, they're iterating. They're not really transforming them. I mean, besides when they came out with the spherical shape. I do think one thing we've talked about many times over the years with Amazon is that in a way it almost feels like they've said, well, you don't want to buy our smart speakers and smart displays, but you do want to buy our smart TVs. Fine, we'll turn your smart TV into a smart display and have it do all the same things as that. So now we can just have to get you to use it, and you already have the technology in your home.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I think we should move on to other topics. We've really talked about this a lot. This has been great. Let's talk about another topic that I think is actually one of the most interesting in the industry. and that's SoundHound. And so SoundHound's an interesting story, whether you think they're doing great work or not, whether you think they're super successful or, there's looming issues. They were able to engineer a $2 billion public offering, which since then is like, I think they're down to 600 or 700 million in valuation. So it's really come off from that significantly. Maybe when they finally went out, it was more like 1.6 to 1.7 billion in terms of valuation. But I think that's very interesting. First of all, that financial investors were willing to make a bet on an independent smart or voice assistant company like SoundHound. And the other thing is they've had a lot of activity this year in particular. So they went through. They also did layoffs too. So let's not forget that they laid off 10% of their people, but they've moved into restaurants and had some traction there, which is driven by a lot of macro trends, and they might be well positioned to be successful there. They finally finished their 20-second language, and so they're trying to get that global coverage. They recently introduced what they call dynamic AI, I think, and essentially it's full duplex interaction that you can talk while the voice assistant's talking. The voice assistant's always talking to you. You're always listening to the voice assistant. We would think of the term barge in for people who are like geeks or nerds in this space. They're enabling that. Actually, Speechly was the first company that I saw that actually had this. They've been doing that for years. It's a really useful feature, and I think it hits on a number of use cases that you can't do otherwise, or they're inconvenient with the traditional turn-based you speak, Alexa speaks, you speak type of model. So in any event, I think SoundHound is really interesting. I'm not sure about the financial position, but they're just rolling ahead and putting out some interesting new products all the time. Let's see, who wants to hit this one first? Peachy-Jean, you want to take it?
Yep, sure. I mean, when the news first broke out, I was like, damn, that's right. Like, that's pretty crazy. I mean, and I think they got smart and they found the gap of when businesses just don't want to go through Amazon or Google, right? I think that's what it is, because of there's flaws. They found the flaws. It essentially, we were just talking about, they can't seem to make it work when you want it to, and not when you don't want it to. And then I think it's with the duplex, I think is going to be effective. I think they also found the especially being in automobiles and restaurants, like those service industries, where they found that use case. And part of that is because when that's your focus, is to find the gaps, you can find them, right? It's that startup mentality. Amazon, Google have already so many other streams of revenue, and they're able to kind of rein in their focus and be able to identify these gaps where they can fill it in. I'm really interested to see how it works out, because I was watching the demo for the duplex and the bargain, and ultimately what's going to end up making or breaking it is what happens if it doesn't work, and how the restaurant will solve it, right? What is that user flow of, if that cuts out, if your internet cuts out, if your whatever cuts out, what happens then, right? And then, or if it works almost too well. Do any of you watch The Bear, that cooking show?
No.
There's a scene essentially when in the back kitchen, there's a scene where it's just too many orders are coming in at once. And that's what I think of. What happens if there's too many orders coming in at once? What happens to the staff? I think that's going to be a big, that's where the insight's going to happen, as far as the limits of AI and then when humans have to intervene. But I think it's going to be something great to watch. I'm excited for it.
Eric, your thoughts on SoundHound?
I think business-wise, I mean, I'm sure there was a modicum of luck, but they were very smart. They hit the SPAC moment at the perfect moment, when it was the most valuable before any crackdown on it. Not that it's the bad actors who basically caused regulators to take a hard line on it, but they were able to come in and get real investors to put up the money to get them out there and then be public without a lot of the usual red tape. So I think that definitely helped. And I think it's notable that in terms of where they've focused since going public, I mean, they've been involved in most of these industries in some form or another, but it's interesting that they're, because they're smaller, because they're more agile, they can focus on things like creating cloud and device-based versions of their creation and hybrid versions. And when they're working with restaurants for payment, instead of having a giant company that they have to use for every moment of it, they could say, well, there are payment companies like Square, we'll partner with them, or there's companies like LG that we can work with to do the things that are not our specialty, and they can they have that agility in that regard. But I think going public is offers opportunities, but I think they're not avoiding all of the places. The ship is running aground a few places that it might not have if they were still private. But I do think in terms of innovation, it has given them some runway for trying new things.
Thomas.
Gosh, that duplex demo was something else, wasn't it? When I watched it, I was like, yes, this is what we need to get that other 50% of users on board with voice assistants. When I watched it, I was reminded of pretty much every time we do user research, I see someone try to speak whilst Alexa is still speaking. Alexa will then stop. It only pick up the kind of the final third of the word and then be like, sorry, I didn't get that. And the person will then try and repeat themselves and get all out of sync. And that is not how humans have conversations. And this kind of barging is something that we have needed since the get-go. It's almost amazing that voice assistants were released without them. And actually, I think it's perhaps a bit of a example of how innovation in the by the kind of the big platforms hasn't really worked over the last couple of years, that it hasn't actually improved, that neither Google or Amazon have gone and solved that, and it's taken kind of third parties to come and do that. I mean, I look at SoundHound and I just think I really wish that they would partner with a speaker manufacturer and make a consumer assistant, because I would buy 5 right now. And as a developer, I feel like I would be most excited working with them over some of the others. So SoundHound, if you're listening, please, 2023 consumer assistant, let's go.
SoundHound, Spotify, and
I'm just desperate for someone else, basically.
And Sonos, but it's just the 3 S's: SoundHound, Spotify, and Sonos together is actually a really interesting company. Now, I will say a couple things. That the valuation that SoundHound came to market with is heavily based on not just their existing book of business. And they do have some backlog because some of the enterprise customers are going to drive some revenue long term. They have to wait for some of that to come in as those devices are sold over the next 5 years. But their growth and the $2 billion valuation is largely based on some monetization through ads or through transactions and those types of things. And so I think it's going to be tough for them. And we'll see. If they can execute it, it's going to be a much bigger than $2 billion business. If the market actually accepts the model that they're proposing, if the market's a little slow to do that, the other interesting thing that's going to happen is that'll keep their stock price down. In fact, it'll probably fall further. A couple of years ago, there were some companies that might have been interested in acquiring SoundHound, but they weren't going to spend the $1.5 billion to $2 billion that their early investors were insisting on. But right now, you could go in and snap it up for a fraction of that cost. If it just takes an extra 12 to 18 months for some of that stuff to take off, that number comes down a little bit more as financial markets become uncertain about what their future is. You may wind up seeing them in some big company. And ultimately, I'm not sure that's a good idea. I'm not sure that's good for the industry. I kind of like the fact that we had Nuance out there. They're sort of very enterprisey. They're hard to get access to and stuff like that, but they were always out there as an alternative. But we didn't really have a good one in the consumer space. SoundHound is sort of emerged as that right now, is one of the leading alternatives, unless you want to just build your own. So I'm hoping that they will get enough success that they can keep that momentum going, build in. And I really think that they could they could build a killer consumer assistant. I've been trying to get Kayvon to do this for a long time, to just have one external assistant. Everyone's always worried about, do you want this? Do they have distribution? All these other things. But, to me, that space is open. If someone could grab it, SoundHound seems well positioned. Okay, so we've got two other topics I want to talk about. We're going to hit on them very quickly. And you're welcome to talk about either one if you like, or both. I think what we call as sort of voice clones has been a big story this year. Synthetic voices. There's been a number of acquisitions. There's new use cases popping up. People actually, it seems like it's a business now. It seemed more like a novelty a couple years ago. So that's been really interesting. And the other thing is large language models, which is somewhat related, but it's completely distinct because most of the voice clones out there are not actually leveraging large language models. But I think large language models being like GPT-3 and all the derivatives off of there, I think if you're in the voice AI space, like these are some of the most interesting sidelines from the main story, which has always been voice assistants. And it's almost like you see a movie and the main character sometimes is a little boring, but like the character actors are really the interesting ones. And I'm starting to see like voice clones, large language models as being those character actors, which are more interesting. What do you think, Tom?
Well, I might talk about large language models and leave someone else to talk about voice clones because I don't know much about them beyond kind of what I've read on Voicebot, and so you're probably better qualified to talk about that. But I mean, the kind of certainly the second half of this year, the large language model space has just been moving so quickly. It's every day you feel like you're having to kind of read fresh papers just to kind of stay on top of it. I was giving a talk on Wednesday about how to kind of use large language models in your chatbot. Like, got out of the talk and OpenAI had just launched GPT chat, and I was like, oh damn it! Like half of what I just said was rendered like incorrect. Well, not quite incorrect, but certainly is about to be superseded. As soon as that goes from kind of a bit of beta testing to a public release, you're going to completely change it. I think the pace of innovation is astronomical. And I think the thing that's fascinating for me is building conversational experiences using large language models requires very different skills, both as a conversation designer and as a conversational app developer, than those that we have been using to build experiences so far. I feel like I've been spending at least the kind of last 6 to 9 months having to kind of like reskill and, try to kind of bring myself up to speed to be able to actually do this. And I think it's going to be kind of very interesting for the industry as a whole, that kind of we're quite used to being kind of on the forefront and to being the kind of the most knowledgeable about this thing. But then this kind of new technology is going to come along that's going to completely supersede the way that we already do it, but is so different that we can't just take what we already do and apply it. So, it's going to be a few upsets, I think.
Yeah, fair enough. Peachy-Jean, what are your thoughts on these topics?
I'll touch on voice clone. I'm the opposite of Tom. Not too much exposed to the larger language models. I think you're right, Brett, when you're saying that it's becoming an actual business versus a novelty, and it's now entering with more business-centric conversations. With the fact that there are examples of James Earl Jones for the Star Wars, Andy Warhol, and it's from the music industry when you're working with talent, and this will expand past that, is the adoption for that is going to come down to a few things. It's going to come down to what that contract's going to say of how you can make sure you're limiting the use case to make sure it's not being taken advantage of, and then like the rights to it, how long it'll last. So I think until more and more adopt, it'll be a reckoning as far as like how the adoption will be by talent. I do think the big use case for it is going to be when it's going to save them time. So think about, again, not just music, but in entertainment in general. It's like all the promos when new movies, new TV comes out, and your radio ads, your audio ads now. I think podcast audio revenue is going to be huge in that telling of like adoption of that, because everyone knows that, you know, when you get either host read or like talent run ads, like there's better, what do you call that? Like brand recognition and brand awareness, and it'll
Better
stay
conversion.
with you. Yeah. So I think that's it. Thank you. I think that's going to be where we're going to notice how advertising is actually going to have like a good effect in adopting like these voice clones. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the state, the artists, and the rights, and how comfortable they are. I mean, you see it now when I'm on TikTok, and deep fakes are already starting to happen, right? And it's some people are going to be all super into it, and some people are like, "This is exactly why I don't want to like play." Yeah. I think it's good. I think it's going to be kind of like voice, and 50-50 you're going to have over the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Eric, you just spoke at a synthetic media conference yesterday, and I know voice clones and deepfakes came up. What are your thoughts on these technologies?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of astonishing how quickly, in some ways, it feels like the technology went from quirky little fun experiment to appearing on national television and becoming a thing that everyone is aware of and can have an opinion about whether it's okay for Anthony Bourdain or Andy Warhol's voice to be synthetically generated for movies. I think that the technology is really the speed at which it's improving and at which it's becoming easier for non-technical people to use is quite amazing. I think it's going to be as ubiquitous as any other voice technology. The way that podcast recording and editing services are able to be done by anyone now, that this is going to be a part and parcel of that. I think, and I'm excited about it. I think there's a lot of questions to resolve. Speaking to the music industry on the global scale, there's quite a lot of experimentation there. Tencent Music in China claims that they have a song with synthetically generated voices that's been streamed 100 million times. And they have a lot of other songs that have been streamed millions of times. It's going to be something to discuss, and then I think in some form adopted in all kinds of entertainment and business practices. And just touching on the large language model element, I think there's a lot going on there too, and I think that we're going to see not just everything from GPT-3, but just the creation of new ways of communication between people who wouldn't be able to communicate normally, thanks to both translation tools and other large language model capabilities. And I think you combine that with these synthetic voices, and you can hear someone's voice speaking whatever language you speak when you're on the phone or even in person. I think I don't know if it's going to develop quite as quickly as some of the media elements, but I think that we're all going to be engaging with that technology sooner than you might think.
Absolutely. And I'll just build on something that Peachy-Jean said about saving time. When these technologies like voice clones, synthetic speech engines save time, it drives adoption. And that's what we've seen. So with voice clones, and we'll talk about this, is also true with large language models. With voice clones, what we're starting to see now is for these types of things like creators or celebrities who need voice and who need to do more voiceovers than they have time in the day to do. And so this allows them to actually do more than they could otherwise, save a little time and those types of things. So I think I'm seeing this trend for celebrity adoption. I'm not sure if there'll be like a little bit of a slowdown there right now, but right now that is really interesting. And there's some scale there because there's a lot of celebrities, but there's not as many movies that are using deep fake technology or some of these other types of solutions. So we started out with the creative process, and we're just moving into just like stone cold efficiency. Like, this is just better for me, that type of thing. And I think the large language models are the same way. People are experimenting. Oh, this would be really fun. I can do I can do something like it's an improv thing where I can talk back and forth, and who knows what'll happen. But really what's happening is companies like Jasper AI are doing, are already making $80 million a year in recurring revenue. And it's probably up from that now. But that's after 18 months of switching their business to just be basically a large language model, GPT-3 based writing assistant. And so I think that that's going to be a really big trend. You guys have been amazing today. So Tom Hewitson, two things. How can people learn more about LabWorks? And what's one thing that you either would like to see or you expect to see next year in this space?
Well, you can learn more about LabWorks at our website, labworks.io, or you can add me on LinkedIn, because apparently that's where all the good chat is now. Like, it used to be Twitter was the place to go, but I've noticed that over the last couple of months, seems to be the good chat has moved to LinkedIn. So add me there instead.
All right.
And big thing you're going to see next year. I think that we're going to see a really good conversational assistant next year, powered by GPT. I mean, we've got GPT chat. I think that there is going to be a voice version of that. In fact, so the OpenAI released an open source ASR called Whisper, which is just about the best performing ASR out there. Horrible to use in implementation because it's quite memory heavy, but perfect if you wanted to train a large language model using voice. So I think that there could be a very interesting voice-driven large language model on the not too distant horizon.
Awesome. Peachy-Jean.
I think what we're going to see next year is, and I know we didn't talk about it at all, but with the metaverse, I'm curious as far how people are going to start integrating voice into there. I think that's going to be a big topic, and how we're going to see, and then we'll see the whether the consequences or the effects as far as everything that we talked about earlier. What's going to happen with Google and no more 3P apps, how their 1P strategy is going to change, and then where Alexa's going to start focusing all their information.
Got it. And I actually expect to see a lot of musicians adopting some of these technologies next year. Eric Schwartz.
Yes, of course, Voicebot.ai. You can read about all the things we talked about today and plenty more. You can follow me on Twitter. You can follow me on LinkedIn as well, of course, but Twitter at Eric H. Schwartz. And I would say check out all the stuff that I don't get to on Voicebot's many exciting newsletters.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm Brett Kinsella, host of the Voicebot podcast, I guess founder of Voicebot.ai, but I'm also the founder of this thing called Synthedia. So if people haven't seen that, we talk about voice clones, large language models, text to image generators, every day. It's a daily newsletter. So just go to synthedia.substack.com. So that's a new thing that we've been working on, because Eric and I have been covering synthetic media for a long time, but we felt like, as Tom indicated, it's just exploded this year, and it really just required a little bit more focused attention. And so that's largely, it's some news, a lot of commentary on that. It feels very much like Voicebot in 2016, where you needed to give context every time something new came out, and there was new stuff every day. And so yeah, check out Synthedia. I hope you do that. And next year, I think that the thing I'm actually looking for is a lot more interactive video. We think of these as like virtual humans and avatars. In the synthetic media space, the text to video is going to be a really big story next year. I think it's mostly going to be a novelty for the next year, but it'll just blow people away. You know, some of the early results of these things is pretty amazing, but I think it's going to be as stimulating as what we're seeing with the image generators, which are just taken over lately. And so we're going to see a lot of really interesting business models. And that's the thing that's a little bit different from the voice AI world, where the voice assistants in many regards were the point of entry, with revenue monetization coming afterwards. But what we're seeing with a lot of the synthetic media solutions, actually it's revenue first. You might do like a little freemium free trial or something like that, but they all charge. And so I see that market right now being very strong, and I see a lot of overlap with conversational AI as Tom was bringing up. And so I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for people who have background in the voice industry to do really well here. All right, folks, find me on the Twitter at Brett Kinsella. Go to voicebot.ai, go to labworks.io, check out Warner Music Group, an amazing organization. Connect with everyone here on LinkedIn. Thanks a lot. And until 2023, bye-bye.
Bye.